Sir, if you leave your seat now, this flight will depart on time. If you don't, none of us will forget what happens next. The announcement did not come over the intercom. It was spoken quietly by Captain Victoria Hayes as she stood in the aisle of business class, one hand resting against the overhead compartment, while more than 30 passengers pretended not to listen. Nathan Brooks looked up from the small coloring book resting on his daughter's tray table. 8-year-old Lily had been carefully filling the wings of an airplane with bright blue crayons. She paused only when she noticed everyone staring at her father. Nathan folded the crayon box shut before answering. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Victoria maintained the practiced calm that had earned her reputation after nearly 14 years in commercial aviation. Her uniform was immaculate. Every silver stripe on her shoulders reflected the cabin lights with perfect precision. "The issue isn't your ticket," she said evenly. "It's the seating arrangement." Nathan glanced toward his boarding pass lying beside Lily's juice box. Seat 3A. Business class. Exactly where they were sitting. Across the aisle, a woman wearing an expensive cream-colored suit crossed her legs impatiently. "This is ridiculous," she said loudly enough for half the cabin to hear. "My husband and I booked these seats months ago. We shouldn't have to sit next to." She stopped before finishing the sentence, allowing her eyes to travel over Nathan's faded gray bomber jacket, worn leather backpack, and inexpensive shoes. The unfinished sentence landed harder than any insult. Several passengers lowered their eyes. Others watched openly. One man quietly raised his phone beneath the armrest. Victoria inhaled once. "Mr. Brooks, we're asking if you'd be willing to move to economy. We'll make sure you're compensated." Nathan studied her face for several seconds. There was no anger in his expression. Only curiosity. Beside him, Lily looked up. "But Daddy..." Nathan placed a gentle hand over hers before she could continue. "It's all right." He reached beneath the seat, lifted the old leather backpack that looked older than the airplane itself, and carefully zipped it closed. No arguments. No raised voice. No demand to speak with management. The silence unsettled the cabin more than outrage ever could. As Nathan stepped into the aisle, Lily slipped her small hand into his. "Did we do something wrong?" she whispered. Nathan smiled without looking back. "No, sweetheart." They began walking toward the rear of the aircraft. The businessman recording lowered his phone slightly. The woman in the cream suit leaned back with visible satisfaction. Someone muttered, "Finally." Captain Victoria watched Nathan disappear beyond the curtain separating business from economy. Something about the exchange refused to settle comfortably in her mind. Passengers who believed they had been treated unfairly usually protested. Some argued. Some threatened lawsuits. Some demanded supervisors. This man had done none of those things. He had simply left. The aircraft door closed moments later. Outside the cockpit windows, the pushback tug connected to the nose gear. Ground control cleared Flight 482 for departure. The engines hummed softly as the aircraft began rolling backward from the gate. Then every cockpit display flashed amber. A sharp tone echoed through the flight deck. "Ground to Flight 482. The controller's voice interrupted. "Abort taxi immediately." Victoria frowned. "Ground confirm." A brief silence followed. When the controller spoke again, his voice sounded different. Not rushed. Not confused. Careful. "An executive private jet has just declared priority access and is now blocking runway 27. Victoria looked through the windshield. Far across the shimmering tarmac, a sleek black Gulf Stream slowly turned sideways across the active runway. Its navigation lights blinked steadily beneath the afternoon sun. For several long seconds, nobody in the cockpit spoke. Then the dispatcher added one final sentence. "Captain, the aircraft has requested that Flight 482 remain exactly where it is until its owner arrives. The strangest people in an airport are usually the ones nobody notices." Long before Flight 482 ever pushed back from the gate, Nathan Brooks had already walked through Terminal C carrying nothing more than an old leather backpack over one shoulder and Lily's small pink suitcase in his free hand. He moved without urgency. No security escort. No executive assistant. No luxury luggage. Just another father trying to keep up with an excited little girl who insisted on stopping at every souvenir shop. "Daddy, look!" Lily pointed toward a display filled with miniature airplanes. "Can I have the blue one?" Nathan crouched beside her, studying each model as if the decision actually mattered. "The blue one flies faster?" She giggled. "Only if you believe it does. Then I think that's exactly the one we need." He smiled and handed the cashier a credit card so ordinary that no one standing nearby gave it a second glance. The cashier returned it with the same polite smile she offered every traveler. No one recognized the name printed across the card. No one paid attention. That was exactly how Nathan preferred it. For nearly 3 years, he had quietly traveled on commercial airlines several times each month despite owning one of the largest private aviation companies in North America. His board of directors never understood why. His executives stopped asking long ago. Nathan always gave the same answer. "If we only experience perfection, we'll never understand what everyone else lives through." He wanted to see delayed flights, long security lines, overworked gate agents, crowded terminals, children crying, passengers helping strangers. Those moments revealed far more about a company than quarterly reports ever could. His own Gulfstream never flew far away. Whenever Nathan booked a commercial flight, the jet remained on standby at the nearest executive terminal with a full crew ready around the clock. Not because he expected trouble, because schedules changed, meetings changed, life changed. Flexibility was simply part of the business. Lily slipped her hand into his as they approached the security checkpoint. "Are we taking our airplane today?" Nathan looked down with a grin. "No. Our airplane gets lonely. It'll survive." She laughed before skipping ahead toward the TSA line. People around them saw nothing unusual. A tired father. A cheerful daughter. That was all. A businessman in an expensive tailored suit stepped around Nathan with an impatient sigh after noticing the old backpack resting against his leg. Another traveler frowned when Lily accidentally bumped her tiny suitcase into his polished shoes. Neither offered a smile. Nathan apologized anyway. "Sorry about that." The man walked away without answering. Lily watched him disappear into the crowd. Why was he mad? "Sometimes people are carrying things you can't see." "Like backpacks?" Nathan chuckled softly. "Sometimes heavier." She seemed satisfied with the answer. An hour later they reached the airline lounge. The receptionist scanned Nathan's boarding pass. Her eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. Business class. 2 passengers. She looked once at the worn backpack. Then back at the computer. Everything matched. "Welcome, Mr. Brooks." Nathan thanked her and led Lily inside. Several travelers glanced toward them. One woman whispered something to her companion before looking away. Another man briefly frowned as if wondering whether someone dressed so simply belonged there. Nathan noticed every stare. He reacted to none of them. He had learned years ago that assumptions required no encouragement. People built them all by themselves. Lily climbed into a chair beside the window overlooking the runways. She pressed both hands against the glass. So many airplanes. Nathan stood quietly behind her. Far beyond the commercial terminals, almost invisible in the afternoon haze, a sleek black Gulfstream rested on the executive ramp. Its engines were silent. Its crew was already waiting. Nathan looked at it for only a moment before turning away. He had absolutely no intention of using it today. At least, that had been the plan. Most humiliations begin long before anyone realizes they're happening. By the time Flight 482 reached its boarding gate, the opinions had already formed. Nathan Brooks noticed them one by one. The gate agent smiled politely until she scanned his boarding pass. Business class. Her expression changed for less than a second. Just enough to make her glance at his faded backpack before handing back the ticket. "Boarding will begin shortly, Mr. Brooks." She was professional, but surprised. Nathan thanked her anyway. Lily stood beside him hugging the little blue airplane they had bought earlier. "Do you think we'll sit near the window?" "We already are." She grinned. "Best day ever." Nathan hoped she would still feel that way an hour later. Around them, the waiting area slowly filled with travelers dressed in tailored suits, luxury watches, designer handbags, and polished shoes that reflected the airport lights. Some carried themselves as though flying business class were less a convenience and more a declaration of status. Nathan had seen it countless times. Airports had a curious way of exposing invisible hierarchies. A boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. "Business class passengers may now board." People immediately stood. Several glanced toward Nathan. One older gentleman looked from Nathan's jacket to his boarding pass and frowned openly. Another passenger whispered to his wife, "I thought business had a dress code." She smiled without answering. Nathan heard every word. He continued helping Lily zip her tiny sweater. When they reached the boarding bridge, a flight attendant welcomed each passenger with the same rehearsed smile. Until Nathan arrived. She scanned his ticket. Then looked back at him. Then at Lily. "Just a moment, please." She typed something into her handheld device. Nothing appeared to be wrong. Still. She checked again. Finally she nodded. "You're all set." Nathan thanked her. As they walked deeper into the aircraft, Lily stopped in amazement. "The seats are huge. They're comfortable. Can I look out the window first?" "You earned it." She climbed into seat 3A before fastening her seat belt exactly as Nathan had taught her. He placed the worn leather backpack beneath the seat instead of in the overhead bin. It fit perfectly. Years of travel had taught him that expensive luggage impressed strangers. Old luggage avoided attention. Across the aisle, a woman in an elegant cream-colored suit entered the cabin while speaking loudly into her phone. "I specifically requested the quiet section." She ended the call the instant she noticed Nathan sitting opposite her. Her eyes paused on the backpack. Then on Lily. Then on Nathan's shoes. She smiled. Not kindly. Disapprovingly. A few minutes later another passenger leaned toward her. They exchanged whispers. Both looked in Nathan's direction. Neither tried to hide it. Lily noticed. "Daddy. It's okay. Are they talking about us?" Nathan adjusted the collar of her sweater. "They're probably talking about something much less interesting." She laughed softly. The woman across the aisle did not. Instead, she pressed the flight attendant call button. Within seconds, a young cabin attendant arrived. "How may I help you, ma'am?" "I believe there's been some kind of mistake." The attendant looked confused. "What sort of mistake?" The woman lowered her voice. "Not enough. I paid a premium to avoid situations like this." The attendant followed her gaze. Toward Nathan. Toward Lily. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the young woman's face. I'll speak with the captain." She disappeared through the curtain leading toward the cockpit. Nathan watched her leave without changing expression. He already knew what would happen next. Not because he had experienced this exact flight. Because he had experienced people. And people almost always revealed themselves when they believed appearance told the entire story. 5 rows behind them, someone quietly lifted a phone and began recording. No one realized they were about to capture a moment that millions of people would eventually watch. Least of all the people who believed they were completely in the right. Power rarely announces itself. It whispers, and waits. Captain Victoria Hayes closed the cockpit door behind her and listened as the muffled noise of the cabin faded into the background. First Officer Daniel Mercer looked up from the departure checklist. "Everything all right?" Victoria hesitated. "Probably." He raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound convincing." She glanced through the small security monitor that displayed the business class cabin. Nathan Brooks sat quietly beside his daughter. Neither of them appeared upset. Neither had called a flight attendant. Neither had complained. "I've got a passenger dispute," Victoria finally said. Seat issue? Not exactly. Daniel leaned back. We overbooked again. No. She folded her arms. One of our premium passengers is requesting that another passenger be moved. Daniel sighed. And why would we even consider that? Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she continued watching the monitor. Nathan was helping Lily untangle the earphones she had somehow tied into 3 impossible knots. He laughed when she accidentally made them worse. She laughed louder. The image looked ordinary. Almost painfully ordinary. Then Victoria remembered the woman in the cream-colored suit. A platinum elite customer. One of the airline's highest value frequent flyers. The kind of passenger corporate offices dislike disappointing. Her tablet chimed softly. Priority customer notification. Special handling recommended. She disliked those messages. Not because they existed. Because they quietly encouraged exceptions. Daniel noticed the notification. There it is. Victoria nodded once. If we refuse, she'll file a complaint before we leave the gate. If we agree. He didn't finish. Neither of them needed to. Victoria had spent her career believing professionalism meant keeping every passenger satisfied. Sometimes that required impossible choices. Outside the cockpit, the lead flight attendant approached with a concerned expression. The passenger in 3C insists she won't fly unless Mr. Brooks is moved. Did she explain why? The attendant hesitated. Not directly. What did she say? She believes he doesn't fit the atmosphere. Silence filled the cockpit. Daniel let out a slow breath. That's not a reason. No. Victoria looked once more at the cabin monitor. Nathan was now showing Lily how to fold the safety information card into a paper airplane. Not to throw. Just to make her smile. Victoria watched the little girl laugh. For reasons she couldn't explain, the sound lingered in her thoughts long after the monitor switched to another camera angle. She stood. I'll handle it. As she walked toward business class, another event unfolded hundreds of yards away. Inside the airport's executive aviation terminal, a uniformed ground coordinator answered a secure phone. Executive operations. A calm voice replied. Maintain standby status. Yes, sir. No departures unless authorized. Understood. The coordinator hung up without asking who had called. He didn't need to. The number was recognized instantly. Within seconds, he notified the Gulfstream crew waiting on the private ramp. The captain of the sleek black jet looked toward his first officer. We're staying ready. No departure time? Not yet. What are we waiting for? The captain smiled faintly. If Mr. Brooks calls. He left the sentence unfinished. That was enough. The engines remained silent. The aircraft stayed parked. Its polished black fuselage reflected the afternoon sunlight, while baggage carts rolled past without paying it any attention. Back inside Flight 482, Victoria stepped into business class. Conversation slowed. Several passengers sensed something unusual. The woman in the cream-colored suit immediately straightened in her seat. Nathan looked up calmly. He had expected her. Victoria stopped beside seat 3A. For a brief moment, she considered walking away. She could ignore the complaint. Close the aircraft door. Leave on schedule. Instead, duty, policy, and pressure combined into a decision that would change every life on board. She offered Nathan a professional smile. Mr. Brooks. The entire cabin fell silent. The hardest words to hear are often spoken politely. Captain Victoria Hayes kept her voice calm. Mr. Brooks, may I speak with you for a moment? Nathan stood without hesitation, careful not to disturb Lily. Of course. They stepped into the galley at the front of the aircraft, just beyond the curtain separating business class from the cockpit. Victoria folded her hands. I'd like to apologize in advance. This isn't a conversation I enjoy having. Nathan waited. She continued. We have a passenger who feels uncomfortable with the current seating arrangement. Nathan said nothing. Victoria glanced briefly toward the cabin. Our team would like to offer you 2 seats in economy. You'll receive a full refund of the fare difference, travel credits, and additional compensation. The words sounded rehearsed. Professional. Almost gentle. Yet they carried the weight of a public judgment. Nathan looked at her for several quiet seconds. Did I violate a policy? No. Was there a problem with my ticket? No. My daughter? Victoria immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. Nathan nodded slowly. So the only issue is that someone doesn't want us sitting there. Victoria couldn't bring herself to answer. The silence answered for her. Back in business class, conversations had nearly stopped. Passengers pretended to read magazines. Pretended to scroll through phones. Pretended not to watch. No one fooled anyone. Lily remained in seat 3A, hugging her little blue airplane against her chest. She kept looking toward the curtain, waiting for her father to return. Nathan spoke softly. If I refuse? Victoria answered honestly. I'll have to involve airport management, and the departure will be delayed. Nathan lowered his eyes for only a moment. Then he smiled. Not because he agreed. Because he had made a decision. I don't want my daughter remembering today as the day she delayed an airplane. Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. I appreciate that. Nathan picked up his old backpack. The leather creaked as he slipped it over one shoulder. Years of use had softened every corner. He reached for Lily's hand. We're changing seats, sweetheart. She blinked. But I like this window. I know. Did we do something wrong? He knelt until they were eye level. No. Then why are we leaving? Nathan gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Because sometimes being kind is more important than being right. She searched his face, trying to understand. Finally she nodded. Okay. She picked up the little blue airplane and followed him. As they stepped into the aisle, every eye in business class followed. The woman in the cream-colored suit relaxed visibly. Without looking directly at Nathan, she adjusted the sleeve of her designer jacket as though order had finally been restored. Someone near the rear whispered, I knew it. Another passenger quietly laughed. The businessman who had been recording since boarding never lowered his phone. His camera captured everything. Nathan walking. Lily holding his hand. The worn backpack resting against his shoulder. The complete absence of anger. As they passed row 5, Lily looked back one last time at the empty window seat. She didn't cry. That somehow made the moment harder to watch. Even one of the flight attendants lowered her eyes. Nathan thanked Victoria before disappearing beyond the curtain into economy. The words caught her off guard. Thank you for handling it respectfully. She wanted to answer. Instead, she simply nodded. The aircraft door closed. Ground crew disconnected the jet bridge. The pushback tug eased the airplane away from the gate. Inside economy, Nathan helped Lily settle into 2 middle seats near the rear of the cabin. She leaned against his shoulder without speaking. Nathan slipped one hand into the pocket of his bomber jacket. His fingers closed around his phone. He unlocked the screen. Opened a contact with no name. Only a single black aircraft icon. He typed exactly 6 words. Hold departure. Await my confirmation. Less than 5 seconds later, the message was marked as read. Nathan locked the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He never looked at it again. Far beyond the terminal, on the executive ramp, the cockpit windows of the silent black Gulfstream suddenly came alive. Its auxiliary power unit started with a low, steady hum. The waiting had just ended. Sometimes the most powerful entrance is made by someone who never intended to enter the stage. Flight 482 rolled slowly toward runway 27. Inside the cockpit, Captain Victoria Hayes completed the final taxi checklist while First Officer Daniel Mercer monitored ground frequency. Everything appeared routine. Until it wasn't. A sharp electronic tone broke the silence. Daniel looked at the navigation display. Ground just changed our clearance. Victoria reached for the radio. Ground, Flight 482. Confirm taxi instructions. The reply came immediately. Flight 482, hold position. Victoria frowned. We're approaching the threshold. Affirmative. Hold position immediately. Outside the windshield, the long stretch of runway shimmered beneath the afternoon heat. Nothing seemed unusual. Then another voice cut across the frequency. Urgent. Controlled. All traffic, maintain current positions. Executive movement in progress. Daniel exchanged a puzzled look with Victoria. Executive movement? Before either of them could speak again, the airport's ground radar screen refreshed. A single aircraft icon began moving from the executive terminal. Fast. Too fast to be ordinary. The sleek black Gulfstream accelerated along a private taxiway before turning smoothly toward the active runway. Victoria leaned forward. What is that jet doing? The controller answered before anyone else could. Flight 482. Continue holding. The Gulfstream crossed directly onto runway 27. Instead of lining up for departure, it turned 90 degrees. Then stopped. Perfectly sideways. Blocking the entire runway. Every vehicle on the airfield froze. Fuel trucks. Maintenance vans. Baggage tractors. Even the airport fire crews paused their routine patrol. Inside business class, passengers noticed the aircraft had stopped moving. Whispers spread through the cabin. Why aren't we taking off? Mechanical issue? Weather? Across the aisle, the woman in the cream-colored suit sighed dramatically. I knew this airline would find another way to waste my afternoon. No one answered. Back in economy, Lily looked out the small window. Daddy. Nathan turned toward her. Yes? The airplane stopped. It did. Is something wrong? Nathan smiled gently. I'm sure someone is making an important decision. His voice remained perfectly calm. He never reached for his phone. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, the Gulfstream's engine settled into a low, steady idle. The aircraft gleamed beneath the sun like polished obsidian. Its windows were too dark to reveal anyone inside. Airport operations erupted into controlled chaos. Inside the control tower, supervisors crowded around radar displays. Who authorized that movement? No unauthorized traffic. The clearance came from executive operations. What executive operation? A dispatcher hurried across the room carrying a printed authorization sheet. His face had turned pale. You need to see this. The supervisor grabbed the document. His eyes widened. That's impossible. What? The aircraft isn't violating instructions. He swallowed. It's operating under priority executive authority. Silence spread through the tower. That level of authority was almost never used. Not by celebrities. Not by politicians. Not even by most Fortune 500 executives. Only a handful of aviation owners possessed it. The supervisor immediately picked up the secure phone. Notify airport leadership. What do I tell them? He looked once more at the authorization code. Then at the aircraft registration. Finally, he spoke. Tell them the registered owner of Brooks Aviation has activated executive ground priority. Back aboard Flight 482, Victoria heard only fragments of the radio conversation. Brooks Aviation. Priority authorization. Owner request. The name brushed against her memory. Somewhere. She had heard it before. Behind her, Daniel slowly turned the cockpit monitor toward her. The external camera showed the black Gulfstream sitting motionless across the runway. Painted beneath the cockpit windows, in elegant silver lettering, were two words that suddenly made Victoria's heartbeat skip. Brooks Aviation. She stared at the name. Then, almost without thinking, she looked toward the cabin camera focused on economy. Nathan Brooks sat quietly beside his daughter, watching the runway, as though he had known exactly what would happen next. The truth doesn't explode all at once. It arrives one name at a time. Captain Victoria Hayes remained frozen in the cockpit doorway. Her eyes drifted from the external camera showing the black Gulfstream to the live cabin monitor focused on economy. Nathan Brooks sat quietly beside Lily. He wasn't making calls. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't even watching the commotion inside the cockpit. He simply rested one hand over his daughter's as she leaned against his shoulder. Nothing about him resembled a man enjoying revenge. The radio crackled again. Flight 482, remain in position. Airport Executive Command is en route. Victoria pressed the transmit button. Ground, what exactly is happening? A brief pause followed. Then the controller answered carefully. Captain, we have been instructed not to discuss operational details over an open frequency. Daniel Mercer looked toward her. That's never happened before. No. Another message appeared on the cockpit operations tablet. Executive response team activated. Seconds later, another notification arrived. Chief Operating Officer, Airport Authority, en route. Then another. Airline Executive Vice President, en route. Victoria slowly lowered the tablet. They're bringing executive leadership to the runway. Daniel stared at the growing list of notifications. For one airplane? No, Victoria whispered. For one person. Inside the airport control tower, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations became whispers. Phones rang without pause. A senior operations manager hurried into the room carrying a digital registry. We confirmed the aircraft registration. The supervisor looked up. Owner? Nathan Brooks. Silence. One controller frowned. I've never heard of him. The supervisor turned the monitor toward the room. A corporate profile filled the screen. Brooks Aviation Holdings. Private Charter. Aircraft Manufacturing. Airport Infrastructure. International Maintenance Operations. Government Aviation Contracts. 43 countries. Thousands of employees. A fleet that dwarfed several national airlines. One controller quietly removed his headset. My God! Another whispered. Why is he flying commercial? Nobody answered. Meanwhile, inside the terminal, black SUVs rolled onto the service road leading toward the runway access gate. Airport security officers immediately cleared a path. Senior executives climbed out almost before the vehicles stopped moving. None of them looked relaxed. Back aboard Flight 482, rumors spread from row to row. Passengers refreshed social media. Some searched the words painted on the Gulf Stream. Brooks Aviation. Within minutes, photographs of Nathan's company filled dozens of phone screens. The businessman who had recorded Nathan walking to economy slowly compared the online executive portrait with the man sitting quietly near row 28. He looked once, twice, then a third time. His face lost all color. Oh! The passenger beside him leaned closer. What? He turned the phone toward her. I think. His voice barely escaped. I think that's him. The woman stared. No. Look. She compared the photograph with Nathan's calm profile. The same eyes. The same jawline. The same quiet smile. Only different clothes. Word traveled through the cabin faster than turbulence. That's the owner. No. The billionaire? The one with the private jet? I saw him move to economy. Heads turned toward the rear of the aircraft. Nathan noticed them. He smiled politely at an elderly couple looking his way. Nothing more. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve. Daddy. Yes? Why is everyone looking at us? Nathan glanced around the cabin before answering softly. Because sometimes people don't recognize someone until other people tell them who he is. She thought about that. Did they know before? They knew everything they needed. Outside, another convoy of vehicles approached the stationary Gulf Stream. Its cabin door remained closed. Its engines continued idling. Waiting. Not for permission. Not for clearance. For Nathan Brooks. And for the first time since asking him to leave business class, Captain Victoria Hayes realized something that made her stomach sink. The airplane blocking the runway wasn't sending a message to the airport. It was waiting for the man she had personally escorted to the back of her aircraft. Real power isn't proven by making people kneel. It's revealed by what you do when they already have. The cabin doors remained closed. The engines continued idling. No one on Flight 482 spoke above a whisper anymore. The atmosphere that had once been filled with quiet confidence had dissolved into uneasy silence. Captain Victoria Hayes walked slowly through the aisle toward economy. This time, no passenger looked away. They watched her. They watched Nathan. They waited. Nathan looked up as she stopped beside his seat. Lily smiled politely. "Hi again, Captain." Victoria forced a small smile in return. "Hello, Lily." Then she looked at Nathan. "Mr. Brooks, may we speak?" Nathan gently unfastened his seat belt. "Of course." They stepped into the rear galley. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Victoria finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Nathan remained quiet. "I made a decision based on pressure." Another pause. "And I failed to ask the only question that mattered." Nathan tilted his head slightly. "What question was that?" She lowered her eyes. "Whether you had actually done anything wrong." Nathan answered softly. "I hadn't." "I know." Her voice almost disappeared. "I'm sorry." The words carried no excuses. No qualifications. Only regret. Nathan studied her expression. She looked exhausted. Not because of the airport. Because of herself. "I appreciate your apology," he said. "It doesn't erase what happened." "I know. But it matters." Victoria nodded slowly. Behind them, passengers pretended not to listen. Every word still reached them. Meanwhile, the airline's executive vice president hurried aboard through the reopened jet bridge, followed by 2 airport officials and the director of ground operations. None of them stopped in business class. None of them spoke to the premium passengers demanding explanations. They walked directly toward the rear of the aircraft. The executive vice president stopped a respectful distance from Nathan. "Mr. Brooks." Nathan turned. The executive straightened his jacket before extending his hand. "My name is Richard Collins." Nathan shook it once. "Thank you for waiting." Richard looked genuinely embarrassed. "On behalf of our airline, I'd like to offer my sincerest apology." Nathan remained silent. Richard continued. "The incident you've experienced falls far below our standards." Nathan glanced toward Lily. "She asked me if she'd done something wrong." Richard closed his eyes briefly. "I'm deeply sorry." One of the airport officials stepped forward. "The runway has been secured. Your aircraft is waiting whenever you're ready." Nathan looked through the nearest window. The black Gulf Stream still rested across the runway. Patient. Motionless. Like it had never doubted this moment would come. He turned back toward Richard. "Do you know why I fly commercial?" Richard hesitated. "No, sir," Nathan answered calmly. "Because reports don't tell me how people are treated." He looked around the cabin. "They only tell me how companies want to be remembered." No one interrupted him. "I've visited dozens of airports this way. Sometimes anonymously. Sometimes with my daughter. I've seen extraordinary kindness. And I've seen ordinary people made to feel invisible." His eyes settled briefly on Victoria. Today's problem wasn't one passenger. It was a culture that allowed one opinion to outweigh simple fairness. The words landed harder than anger ever could. Richard nodded slowly. "We will begin a full review immediately." Nathan shook his head. "No." The executive looked confused. "No? I don't want a review." Silence. "I want change." He looked toward every flight attendant standing nearby. "Train your people to defend the passenger who has done nothing wrong. Not the one with the loudest voice." Victoria felt tears gathering before she realized it. Lily quietly reached for Nathan's hand. "Daddy." "Yes? Are we still going on vacation?" Nathan smiled for the first time since boarding the aircraft. "Of course we are." She squeezed his hand. "Good." Around them, several passengers lowered their eyes. Not because they had been caught watching. Because they finally understood that the man carrying the old backpack had never needed anyone to recognize his success. He had only hoped someone would recognize his humanity. People will forget what you owned. They will never forget how you made them feel. The runway was finally cleared. The black Gulf Stream slowly turned away from the active taxiway and disappeared toward the executive terminal without a single unnecessary movement. It had delivered its message. Nothing more. Inside Flight 482, preparations for departure resumed. No one complained about the delay. Not anymore. The same passengers who had once measured status by seat numbers now sat quietly, avoiding one another's eyes. Captain Victoria Hayes made one final announcement before closing the cockpit door. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience." She paused. "Today has reminded all of us that professionalism begins with treating every passenger equally." Her voice remained steady. "But speaking only for myself." Another brief silence. "I'm sorry." The cabin stayed completely still. No applause. No whispers. Only understanding. Several minutes later, the aircraft lifted smoothly into the afternoon sky. As the city disappeared beneath scattered clouds, the tension that had filled the cabin slowly gave way to reflection. The businessman who had recorded Nathan from the beginning hesitated before standing. He walked toward economy carrying his phone. "Mr. Brooks?" Nathan looked up. "Yes?" The man swallowed. "I filmed what happened." Nathan waited. "I wanted evidence because I thought you were being treated unfairly." He looked ashamed. "But I also never said anything." Nathan smiled gently. "You don't owe me an apology for recording." The man lowered his eyes. "I owe you one for staying silent." Nathan considered his words. Then nodded. "Next time." The man looked up. "Help the person before you reach for the camera." The businessman quietly erased the video in front of him. "I will." A few rows away, the woman in the cream-colored suit remained seated alone. The confidence she had displayed before departure had vanished completely. After several minutes, she slowly approached Nathan. Her voice trembled. "I don't expect forgiveness." Nathan listened without interrupting. "I judged you." She glanced toward Lily. "And I judged your daughter." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I'm deeply sorry." Lily looked at her father. Nathan answered calmly. "I hope the next family you meet never has to wonder whether they belong." The woman nodded silently. She understood. No lecture could have been more painful. When the flight landed 3 hours later, airport staff lined the jet bridge, expecting Nathan to leave first. He didn't. Instead, he stepped aside. Families with small children exited before him. Elderly passengers followed. Then everyone else. Nathan and Lily were among the last to leave the airplane. As they reached the terminal, Victoria stood waiting near the aircraft door. Not as a captain. Simply as a person. She handed Lily the small blue toy airplane that had slipped beneath the seat during the confusion. "I think this belongs to you." Lily smiled brightly. "Thank you." Victoria looked at Nathan one final time. "I won't forget today." Nathan adjusted the worn leather backpack over his shoulder. "I hope you don't." She offered a faint smile. "Not because of who you are." Nathan returned the smile. "But because of what happened." She nodded. "I understand." Nathan took Lily's hand. Together they walked through the terminal like any other father and daughter. No security detail. No cameras. No private escort. Only two ordinary figures disappearing into a crowd that finally saw them clearly. Lily squeezed his hand. "Daddy?" "Yes?" "Will we fly on a regular airplane again?" Nathan smiled as sunlight poured through the terminal windows. "Of course." "Even after this?" He looked around at hundreds of strangers beginning journeys of their own. "Especially after this." Because dignity was never reserved for the people who could afford the best seat. It belonged to every person who stepped on board. And sometimes, the most unforgettable flight wasn't the one that reached the highest altitude. It was the one that taught everyone on it how low prejudice could fall. and how high kindness could rise.